Good afternoon and welcome to the November 8th, 2023 work session of the Eugene City Council. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials webpage. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I call this work session to order, and I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking forward to today's discussion, and we have quite a few people here as panelists. So we've got like a dream team. I believe Jeff Petrie is captain of the dream team, and he's going to kick us off with an overview of what we're going to talk about today.
You're so kind. Thank you, Sarah. Let me share my screen. I can get a verbal confirmation you can see it.
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I am Jeff Petrie, the Curbside and Admin Services Director in the Planning and Development Department. I'm also the acting Public Space Team Incident Commander. We also have key members from our Public Space Team, the Dream Team, in attendance at this work session. The council poll for this work session topic was persistent violators, chronic behavioral problems, and open air drug use. We have split the poll into two work sessions, with this one focusing on persistent violators and chronic behavioral problems, followed by a work session on open air drug use in Measure 110. As the city continues to work with government and nonprofit partners to expand shelter, affordable housing, and support resources, the city is also responsible for addressing safety, sanitation, and access issues across the community. In many cases, no other agency shares these demands for service requests aside from the city of Eugene. For today's discussion, we will provide an overview of the past, present, and future actions and services for addressing safety, sanitation, and access issues across the community, then followed by time for you to ask questions and discuss the presented items. A very brief history of the last few years starts in 2020 when we experienced a global pandemic with local stay-in-place orders that made public space camping pervasive, ongoing, and highly visible. We also saw the formation of impromptu and then city-managed temporary camps in our community, some with far more than 200 occupants. We also had hundreds of vehicles occupying curbs beyond code allowances that disrupted business and resident uses of the curb. To support the community and respond to this crisis, the city stood up a unified command structure that aligns city resources, staff, money, and objectives to create new shelters, access internal and external resources, and provide a more efficient response to community impacts. As you can see in this chart, we're still receiving an elevated level of service requests from the community around camping and stored vehicles. We have addressed the vehicle complaints that peaked in 2021 through a combination of signage and regulation changes, as well as the creation of and dedication of a neighborhood services officer team. To reiterate, this chart shows requests for services that were marked as either camping related or stored vehicles from our community. The orange triangle line is service requests in the right of way. The green line, the squares, are service requests in our parks and open space areas. And the top blue line is vehicles stored on the street service requests. The data here does not include the multiple duplicate complaints for a single location or a vehicle, just each unique instance that we then address from a work order status. We added up all the duplicate complaints. It would increase service requests each year by several thousand. It also does not complain public safety service requests, and we'll review it on this slide here. If we look at calls for Eugene Fire and Police Services, we also remain at an elevated level too. So far this calendar year, we've had 239 fire calls for service related to tent, RV, campfire, and trash fires. This is about 24 calls per month. While it's less than the 360 calls for services experienced in 2021, it's still a meaningful number for service requests. For police, have received 11,562 calls for service during the last 12 months that were marked in the dispatch system as likely related to the unhoused population. These calls account for approximately 10% of the total call volume for Eugene during this time, on par with previous years. In summary, our public safety and our civilian teams continue to experience an elevated level of community service requested that are marked as camping or vehicle storage related. While we remain at an elevated levels of service requests from the community, we have accomplished quite a bit in the last few years. To review a few of these, what we have done, about a year ago, we embedded the unified command structure into the work of our everyday services and created what we call the public space team. We created and opened 5 safe sleep sites, serving both vehicles and small shelters, adding some 250 spaces to what had been a pandemic decreased shelter capacity locally. We have aligned our legal work structure by amending city code and administrative rules to comply with state law. In 2021, council requested staff develop and implement a parking plan to create curbside vehicle turnover in the West Eugene industrial commercial areas. Staff completed that project in 2021 and continue to work with business and neighborhoods to manage the curb. The volume problem did decrease dramatically and now are handled with periodic responses as necessary as the punch of the overall community. To date, we've installed approximately 1,000 parking signs in our community. Oops, I'm sorry. And the alternative response study led to the creation of 3 new positions, including the public space team incident commander in the planning and development department, the downtown incident commander in the police department, and an alternative response planning chief in the fire department. The downtown incident commander position is filled, and we are recruiting for the other 2 positions. We have also added critical staffing in the 2018 parks levy to address growing safety and sanitation concerns and park uses inconsistent with park rules. This included 2 park ambassadors, 2 park resource police officers, and an illicit activity cleanup team. The 2023 levy enhanced services by adding 2 additional park ambassadors and allowing the park ambassadors team to operate 7 days per week and prioritize highly impacted parks, including Washington, Jefferson, Martin Luther King Jr., Monroe, and Stolberg Gardens parks. The neighborhood service officer position was a pilot position in 2021 to address code compliance in the right-of-way throughout the city. The current budget increased staff from 4 acting capacity positions to a total of 8 positions, of which 4 are regular and ongoing and 4 are limited duration for the biennium. We have currently filled 6 of the NSO positions since July 1st, and the team operates 6 days per week. We're actively recruiting to fill the remaining 2 positions. Additionally, the city's latest vehicle towing contract added more companies, increasing the capacity for needed tows. Previously, we would often have vehicles eligible for tow because of violations or safety, and would not always be able to get a truck because of limited capacity. That has not been the case since August. And finally, we've created a dedicated cleanup teams in a right-of-way to work to remove items and debris from the right-of-way. As we've added staff, to continue to do that work in this budget cycle. All these teams are under the umbrella of what we call the public space team. The public space team continues the work of the unified command structure. This slide shows all the primary work groups on the public space team, although there are many more teams and staff involved with this coordinated response. The teams work in unison to respond to service requests and work towards a safe and clean community. The teams also work with community partners, including Lane County, eWeb, University of Oregon, State of Oregon, Bureau of Land Management, 4J and Bethel School Districts, and the Union Pacific Railroad. The public space team was strengthened this budget cycle with the addition of 3 positions: the public space team incident commander, which leads this team, as well as the downtown incident commander in the police department, and the alternative response planning chief in the fire department. These 3 positions will work together to coordinate service delivery for our community. If we look at what we're doing, we can take a community-wide view to the present here. This is a couple pictures showing a heat map for work done by our field teams. These heat maps show that the teams work throughout the city, but concentrate efforts as indicated by the red blobs in the Whitaker and Jefferson West Side neighborhoods. The map on the left indicates where our neighborhood service officers have issued warnings or parking fine citations. And the map on the right is where our right-of-way cleanup teams have collected items and debris. If we move from the cloud viewpoint of the city and down to specific areas, our work gets more complicated due to the intermixing of jurisdictions and property lines. For example, let's look at the Amazon Creek corridor in West Eugene, an area that has received increased number of service requests from the community. This photo is of West 11th, running across the middle of the photo from City View on the right, towards the left, which is the west, where Amazon Creek goes under West 11th. It shows that we work in a complex mix of jurisdictions, rules, and codes. In many sections of the Amazon Creek, the private property lines go to the center of the creek. The green areas on the map indicate where park and open space areas are and park rules apply. There are also the red areas that are there are also red areas throughout the corridor here where parking and open space rules do not apply. Many areas throughout this corridor are private property, and the city has an easement that overlays those private properties. We're continuing to work with private property owners to have a letter of trespass on file for police department for staff to respond to service requests on private property. We also work with co-compliance and educating property owners about their property responsibilities. Further, our various public space team members work throughout this area every day addressing service requests. Our next slide will focus on the right-of-way and parking code to have a better understanding of multiple violations received by vehicles. The objective of this slide, even though it's quite detailed, is to show that a small number of vehicles account for multiple warnings and parking fines. Each green bar is a unique license plate that either received a warning or a $1 parking fine. This is over the last 10 months. Based on service requests from the community and enforcing our regulated parking areas, parking and neighborhood service officers have issued 5,770 warnings and parking fine citations to vehicles for storage on the street or expired license plates. There are about 40 vehicles indicated on this slide by the green bars. However, if we narrow it down to vehicles that get more than one warning or parking fine per month, then there are just a handful of vehicles receiving multiple citations. We will visualize one of those vehicles on the next slide. But before we do that, there's another common community complaint regarding vehicles with expired or no license plates. In the last 10 months, parking has issued close to 2,500 citations or parking fines of $90 each to vehicles with expired or no license plates. Of those numbers, about 450 had no plate visible. Vehicles operating on our streets without legal registration is a public safety problem that's shown to be a major point of concern for our community. Our neighborhood and parking officers continue to write this violation when service requests are received or observed in our regulated parking areas. We regularly receive complaints about vehicle parking in our residential areas and moving around the neighborhood. Here is a time lapse of an example of such a vehicle we saw earlier in the chart. This animation maps out points where a warning or parking fine was issued, and then an arrow on the line showing this vehicle's movement direction. For this specific vehicle, we received 69 service requests over the last 10 months, mostly for storage on the street violations. Within this 69 complaints were also duplicate complaints because neighbors and other community members will report the same infraction multiple times. Officers responded to the service request and issued a total of 26 citations over the last 10 months. 24 of these citations were warnings for potential violation of storage on the street code, and 2 were parking fines. The vehicle has not violated the 72-hour storage on the street rule and has not received a storage on the street parking fine. It moves when a warning is issued. That is, staff received the service complaint, the service requests, respond to the request, issue a warning of potential violation, and when an officer returns after 72 hours, the vehicle is not present because it has moved from this location. We then mark that service request as closed. While this vehicle generates community service requests, it complies with the city's storage on the street code for parking in the public right of way. So one of the questions that we've addressed the past, the present, and the future, what else can be done? What are other potential code changes that were asked for in the council poll? To answer this question, there are 4 potential code changes that could address community-wide parking concerns. The first item is parking time limit. In 2021, council amended Eugene Code 5.265 to define a block as both sides of the street and require a vehicle to move 2 blocks away before returning. What we have experienced since then through our municipal court adjudication process is that appeals are upheld because it's not clear if the vehicle moved 2 blocks away after returning to the park on the same block in the same day. This potential amendment would reduce repeat citations on the same block face, clarify the code, and reduce staff time. The second potential code change relates to sleeping areas, vehicles in sleeping areas. In 2021, council amended Eugene Code 5.2253E to add recreation vehicles to prohibited parking from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the block of a residence, motel, apartment, house, hotel, or other place of sleeping accommodation. It is a $25 violation. The current process is receive a service request, respond to the request, chalk the tires, issue a warning in the afternoon, then return in the morning. If chalk marks are still visible, issue a parking fine of $25. This potential code change will enable the officer to impound the vehicle if the 3rd fine violation happened within a 90-day period. They're rolling 90 days. A third area of potential code amendment is to Eugene Code 5.225. This would prohibit a vehicle from blocking a mailbox and authorize a citation and/or impoundment, similar to blocking a driveway. This is a frequent service request across the community, and something that for people that receive this, they usually receive a note from their postal carrier asking them to move the vehicle that may or may not be their vehicle. The 4th potential code change is around vehicle discharge. This potential amendment to Eugene Code 5.225 would mirror the vehicle discharge violation in Eugene Code 4.86, Section G. The amendment would enable the neighborhood and parking officers to respond and remediate the situation more quickly and not utilize limited police resources. The neighborhood and parking officers issue citations of violations in Chapter 5, not in Chapter 4. What else can be done moving forward? In addition to Chapter 5 potential code amendments, staff continue to pursue internal process improvements. As discussed earlier, the public space team brings together many different city program areas. The Amazon Creek is one example of multiple city work units working together that plays out every day across the city and crosses over with other jurisdictions within our urban growth boundary. We also look at our admin rules, such as park and open space rules, and our contracts for ongoing service improvements. And we are continuing to hire key positions such as our incident commanders, our planning chief, our maintenance workers, and our neighborhood service officers. So we provided a quick review of our past, present, and future, and we are here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's such interesting and revealing data. I really appreciate that breakdown and the list of the sort of smaller number of vehicles that are sort of have a disproportionately negative impact on the community. And so I'll be very interested to hear the questions that counselors have to ask about this. I'll just launch in while I'm waiting for hands to go up. The one vehicle where you tracked all of the different points at which they had been. So these potential modifications that the council is considering, which of those would actually have an impact on that particular vehicle and that behavior?
Yeah, so the vehicle is following our code, and it's a public way, it's parking legally. If the vehicle was found to be parking overnight in a place of sleeping, narrow to that, and it happened 3 times in a 90-day period, that would address that specific case.
That is helpful. Are there other questions? Yeah, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. It took 3 tries on that unmute. And thank you, Jeff, for the presentation. I thought that was extremely helpful. And I do recognize it's not every vehicle out there that's creating these issues. And I know in my own ward, I've tracked some that literally have 3 points they go to, and they just move from one to the next, but it creates problems where they are ending up. But others are figuring out how to make this work and remain within, I guess, acceptable parameters. I do have a question. The $25 fee, the fine, do you feel that that's adequate? It seems pretty low. I mean, and the level of inconvenience this is causing, there's frequently garbage left behind. I mean, it's just a problem for people in the residents, for our, workers that are trying to stay employed, and employers that are trying to remain in business.
Yeah, great question, Counselor. The $25 violation, it's not a frequently used violation we have because the number of hours of staff involved with going through the process. But as we add more staff, we have the ability to respond to service requests. We do have a proposal working with the municipal court judge of raising many of our fines to $50, but we also have some in our code, we have some maximum fine levels that are set there before we can do that, change up that fine level in the code.
Well, I, for one, would be in favor of increasing that. Without consequences, people will continue behaving in ways that are, creating problems for others. And as far as our public streets go and our parks, public space is just that. It's public space that everybody should have a right to use, but we shouldn't be allowing people to monopolize that space. I know that we collectively receive continual communications from the public complaining about the current state of the situation. I would like to say I have seen improvement. I think the additional staffing that's been directed to this has helped substantially. It doesn't mean the problem is solved. We're still trying to deal with an overwhelmingly large problem, but I think it's really important that we give our city staff that's charged with protecting these spaces and protecting our community the tools they need to get the job done. So I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with Councilor Grove's assessment about that $25 violation being, or the need for that $25 violation to be significantly increased. I would support adding a 0 to that. A couple numbers that jump out at me, and Jeff, thank you for the presentation. It's a sobering presentation. 65 warnings for that one particular vehicle. Obviously the heat map shows that in that downtown core, it shows where there's persistent problems, but I hear from South Eugene neighbors regularly about the back of Tugman Park and vehicles or operators of said vehicles just moving along with one of those 5,000 plus warnings. They'll move along a few blocks and they'll be right back, and they're parked in proximity to a park that is used by entire neighborhood, children, folks walking their pets, and in close proximity to a storm drain. My question, I've got several, revolves around the blocking the mailbox piece, and maybe this is a question not only for operations, but it's a question for legal counsel. Could we, in addition to prohibiting a vehicle from blocking a mailbox, include a storm drain, fire hydrant, or a driveway as places in which council would authorize vehicle impoundment when there's a violation of blocking said additional pieces beyond a mailbox?
Most likely, yes. The question would be for blocking a driveway. I think the answer very likely is yes. The only reason why I say very likely yes is so when the request was made whether we could add a provision around blocking a mailbox, what I did was make sure there was nothing in state law that specifically addressed it already, or because it was a mailbox, I also looked at federal law. So I would just have a caveat to say I would want to double check on those three things that you listed to make sure there wasn't something out there already that maybe we've already adopted by reference into our code or that exists out there in state law that we need to stay consistent with. Jeff Main?
Thank you. Thanks.
Maybe I can jump in. I can share that currently blocking a driveway is a violation in our Chapter 5, and it's 3 feet on either side of the driveway wing. We do enforce that, have enforced that for a while, and blocking a fire hydrant is also in our code and very clear. The drains is not in our code, and I'm not sure where they all fall on the block face. They tend to be at the ends, which are also usually yellow zoned and already accounted for in our code. So I think my initial thinking about it is that we have those 3 items already in our code that we can address.
Great. I'd want to explore bike lanes too, now that I think about it. Jeff, you mentioned the towing safety has, or whatever problems were with towing safety have gone down since August. Could you elaborate on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. We, in the bike lanes, we do have code for citing and removing a vehicle from a bike lane.
Right.
That's it. In July, the city contracts with tow companies, and I think the 5-year contract expired in July. We put it out for bid. We added more vendors, more tow contractors on that. That has given us more capacity for towing services.
Okay, thank you. Emily and then Alan.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and all the graphs. I have a bunch of small questions. When you showed the service requests, where does private land fall in there? It seemed to be parks and right-of-way and parking on the street. So are we getting a lot of requests for, not vehicles obviously, but camping on private land? Or camping in private parking lots? I don't know. Do we have anything about that?
Well, you want me wait or?
I have many questions, so
Okay,
I'll
okay.
try to do them one at a time.
Okay, fair enough. The service requests come through, and there's some check boxes people can check box. They get filtered throughout the city. So one answer is some of those come to, and I see Lydia popping out, but they go straight to the code compliance inbox. So that's one data measure. The other part is sometimes people submit service requests and it's not clear what jurisdiction it is, and our staff go out to figure out which jurisdiction, including private property, and pass that on to the right team member. But maybe Lydia.
So those are kind of captured in the graph already?
They would be, well, the graph, we didn't show every complaint we've ever received, and we don't have the code compliance private property. It was only for right-of-way, parks, and storage on the street violations. So that is not captured there.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm not getting a lot of complaints about that, but it seemed like an open area. Are the citations working at all? $25 isn't that much, but I know a lot of people just ignore the citations no matter what they are. So are they having any effect?
I think we're referring more to the sleeping in next places, sleep accommodations. We've issued a small number of those violations. I haven't tracked through the adjudication process to see if they get paid or if it changes behavior.
I think that would be valuable information if they're not working. What would work, and would it make any difference it was $250 or $25? Because if you can't pay $25, you're not going to pay $250. I have no idea what other alternative ramifications we could have. What is the maximum fine level? Do we know what that is? Well, you mentioned there was a maximum fine level.
I think I see Catherine open up a book. I do believe the maximum for that violation is $50. And we have, I believe that's set by city code. We have not looked at what ORS maximums are, unless Catherine can actually pull it up really quick.
The yellow paint. We don't have much yellow paint. It's all faded away, chipped away. Do we have any kind of budget or ability to replace that? Because I have found that it's very effective. People do notice it. Where I live, it's faded away, so people are parking by fire hydrants. And I already knew about the driveways. I've had to have that told once before. So can we have more yellow paint?
Yeah, our Public Works Traffic Operations team, they take in the service requests for areas that are prioritized for paint. They have a systematic approach about how they approach to refreshing the curb strip in the city. If there are specific areas we would like to know, it's one thing that it's more challenging to go through and paint every possible curb in the city. And what we look at is prioritizing the areas that the paint would be more helpful. So if there are specific areas, please let us know. We can put them into the service requests. Although it is raining and it's hard to paint outside in the rain right now.
Well, there is a particular mailbox in my ward that's gotten many complaints, and I wonder if we could put yellow paint. What would happen if somebody went out with their wire brush and a can of yellow spray paint and put it in themselves? Would, anybody notice? Would there be a punishment?
Good question. We do verify whether it's legal yellow paint and whether it's a legal infraction. It's contingent. Good question.
There are code provisions that prohibit people from painting and doing things to our right of way. So there would be a different separate offense if someone was to do that. And I can provide some information about the maximum penalty. Just to confirm, we're talking about a violation of 5.2253, correct, Jeff?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so that is your code currently sets the maximum fine at $100, and so the 25 I'm guessing is the presumptive fine that is set by the municipal court that Judge Gill, as your presiding judge, has the authority. So Jeff's working with him to talk about some of those presumptive fines. So right now you have authorized and made a policy decision already to allow up to 100. So right now it would be the presumptive fine we're going on with your presiding judge to raise that beyond 25.
Well, it seems like with inflation and everything, we might need to, but if they're ineffective, what's the point? On the Amazon Creek, I think I missed what the red lines were. Is that private land? Why do park rules not apply there?
It is private lands and easement. Our park rules, we do have, I think Matt's on here, but they specify a certain distance from the center of the creek for the multi-use path and a little bit more. It doesn't go all the way. It doesn't fulfill the entire easement area.
So what can we enforce in that area, or do residents call up for a trespass letter?
I can jump in if you want, Jeff. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Councilor Semple. I think that you're talking about what our code compliance team would address on private property, where the parks rules cannot be applied. As Jeff said, we confirm with the property owner that there's a trespass letter, work with the police department to remove any campers if they are there, and then work with the property owner to abate the property. It's not a place where we as the city can go in and clean it up. We work with the property owners to do that. So we do have codes. It might be a little bit of a slower process.
That vehicle that had 65 interactions. It's all in Ward 1. I do appreciate the extra attention to the troublesome parks. Doesn't really seem like it's helping enough. I know Monroe Park has asked for 2-hour parking around the park, and it hasn't happened yet, so they're irritated. As always, I have a concern about I'm out of time. The people who the other people. Anyway, maybe I need a second hand. Thanks.
Yeah. Emily, I'm happy to put you in the queue for a second round if you have
Thank
more.
you. Okay.
But now we'll turn to Alan.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Councilor Lindsay Leach. And a 58-42 is a pretty significant margin and pretty good win there, Lindsay. Good job. Glad that I'll get to continue to work with you on the council. So really looking forward to that. So I have sort of the same concerns as Emily, which is I assume many of these people that get these citations can't pay them. And it's very, do you know what percentage of the people actually pay them?
I don't track the individual ticket by vehicle specific to those pieces.
Is that something we can find out, what percentage get paid actually?
I'm gonna say yes. The data should be there. I'll need to work with court to understand that piece. It'll take a little bit of time.
I'm assuming this is kind of like that the people that are getting these fines are homeless and probably jobless and are indigent. And this is kind of like the camping violations where they just stack up. One time on the police commission, we heard a story about a person who had over 40 camping violations. It made absolutely no difference to give them another citation because it didn't mean anything. And it didn't work anyway. They just stacked up. And once they get to stability, though, it did create a problem for them because they can't overcome that. And it's very difficult. So I'm not sure we're actually doing anything. Same question about impounding cars. The violations that we're looking at, that they impound them. Two questions: how often are they used, and is it the same ones over and over again?
I'll think through my head real quick here. There are a couple areas where vehicles are removed from the streets, like the prohibited no stopping, standing, the storage on the street if it goes past the 72 hours, expired tags past 72 hours. I don't see a lot of the repeat offenders. There is a small number of vehicles that might go in and come back out and go in over time. I forget your first question.
Well, how often is it used? Yeah, and went over and over.
We issue a lot of warnings. So we put that. So it is a tool that's used out in the field, but we do issue our warnings are a lot more than what our actual citations are.
You know, how many cars do we impound a year? Individual, not the same ones over and over.
Yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that. I have a number in my head. It's 600, 700. I don't know if that's, going back in history, if that's a large number or smaller number relative out of norm.
Yeah, right. And if it's $100 and we increase the fine to $100 and impound their car, and they're homeless or jobless, that doesn't make any difference to them either. What happens if they can't pay the impoundment fee? What happens to the vehicle?
So our impoundment process, when we tow a vehicle from the public right of way or city property, the owner of the vehicle has what we call a validity hearing within 5 days at municipal court. And we encourage if your car gets impounded and you feel like it was impounded incorrectly, then to have that validity hearing. And court will work with the owner of that vehicle for payments or reduced fine schedules and those pieces. If that time passes and that lien is perfected and they show ownership of the vehicle, they can pay the fees, which is not necessarily the parking fines, the fees for impoundment, and remove the vehicle from impoundment. Or if they don't retrieve the vehicle, there's a perfecting a lien process, 15 days, 30 days, where it can be sold or recycled down the road.
So do we ever, what happens if they can't pay or do any of that? Do we keep the vehicle, or what happens in that case? And how often is that? What I'm getting is impoundment really a sanction that works? I'm wondering if, you know, if we stiffen up these things, which I understand the problem, I understand what's going on, but I'm not. I'm wondering if these things will work and if it makes any difference. I mean, if it's just like the camping guy who got over 40 citations, that didn't work. And if it's the same, you know, it's poor, jobless, homeless people that can't afford to pay these things, or they get their car impounded and then they're homeless, and it just makes it worse. I'm just not really sure that fines and impoundment are the right tools, but I don't have any really good ideas about what to do alternatively. I'd like to hear what people think about that at the public hearing. So, any comment about
that? Maybe I can address the impoundment piece. What we find in the public right away is that because of the impoundment potential outcome, we do find people comply with the code. If we did not have that tool, we would probably see less compliance in the right of way.
Okay, that was a helpful answer, a helpful line of questioning. All right, I have 3 counselors up for a second round. Are there any counselors who haven't asked a question yet or spoken who want to jump in at this point? All right. If not, I'll hold a place for you when you're ready, and we'll go back to Randy, then Matt, then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to go back to the Amazon Canal and the private property that's intermixed within public parks lands. First of all, I think the Parks and Open Space has done a really good job of trying to address that, but I also have seen how the private property intermingled into the public property has really created a challenge. I certainly don't know what the answer is to this, but city manager, I'm hoping we can come up with some kind of a strategy, you know, even if it's taking a staff and going door to door of the private property owners and getting, you know, encouraging them to sign the trespass letters. But it's, you know, I walk that path fairly regularly, and I did a comprehensive walk here a couple Fridays ago. And I memean, the human waste and the pollution that gets into the Amazon, which finds its way into Fern Ridge and then finds its way back into the Willamette River, whether it's the waste is from private property or public property, it has the same effect. And it seems like part of this is to try and protect a waterway. And so I would really like to hear some thoughts of how we can go about that. And I mean, not just off the cuff here, but just, you know, what would work? How can we be more responsive? How can we help protect this asset and protect our community? Because some of these encampments also, the people in them are threatening people using the path, and it's not a safe area. So I've got a number of concerns there, but I mean, it all starts with not having camping along our waterway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matt, and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Councilor Gross, not only for your observations, but for launching today's critically important work session poll. I'm on a page on the City of Eugene's website, eugene-or.gov, in which citizens, residents can report concerns. And I see an odd discrepancy. And so I wonder, when I read that city teams will prioritize response based on a multitude of factors, and one of those factors are vehicles engaged in camping within 50 feet of a school, playground, or private residence. I wonder why that's not consistent with council's direction that would prohibit camping within 1,000 feet of an educational entity, a school, or or the library. Is there any is there a reason that our code sparses out vehicle camping versus unauthorized street camping?
I think the original question was around the website. I don't know about the code question. That was a matrix that we used to prioritize all the responses and requests for service that we were getting. 50 feet is a visual number that's easier for our community to understand versus 1,000 feet. We do respond to, we can edit that text online to go out to 1,000 feet, but it is an area that just based on our interaction with the community, it's an easier visualization of what close to a school would look like. Okay, that's helpful. I would long for some uniformity and significantly increase that that visualization prioritization so it would match existing code, please. And on the topic of uniformity, Councilor Semple mentioned a park in her ward in which there's a longing for a time limit for vehicle parking. And I would echo that there's the same longing from community members that I hear from regularly in Ward 2. I don't know if an amendment to any one of the proposed motions would be needed to address it, but I would ask, how doable is it for a uniform 3-hour or 5-hour limit for vehicle parking around our community parks citywide? So we don't have to piecemeal, we can just have one clear direction. And I preface it as at the top of this conversation, it was impressed upon us that there are community-wide parking issues. There are far beyond community-wide parking issues. There are community-wide public safety issues, community-wide public health issues, and community-wide environmental issues. Thank you. Councilor, the parking regulations in West Eugene commercial industrial areas, we continue to install regulations around parks. We create turnover and access to our parks. The standard sign is 2-hour parking Monday through Sunday, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And Tugman Park is an area that's on our list to go through the administrative process and add more of those regulations. And we're continuing to work with parks to address turnover and access issues in all of our parks. But we are slowly working through our signage, our administrative orders, and our regulations across the city.
Okay, thank you. Emily and then Alan, and then I think we need to probably wrap this up.
Thank you. Can we make the time limit less than 72 hours? Because people have plenty of time to get even more irate during those days. And if you park more than 2 hours in a 2-hour zone, you can get a ticket 10 minutes after that's up, $25, just like that. So it's not very different than being somewhere for 72 hours. I am concerned about allowing only every 2 hours because there's not enough parking for residents in many areas. And to move your car every 2 hours, you can't do that while you're at work. It gets to be a problem. So unless you have a zone where you get a permit, which I would like one, it gets very difficult for the people who live there. And then if an RV comes and takes up a couple of spaces and they can stay there for 72 hours, it doesn't feel fair. And people are irritated on both sides. So I don't know if we can give a ticket sooner. We're concentrating on parking, which this work session is about, and I appreciate that. But I will bring up that the tent camping is still rampant everywhere, and it's also a problem, different issue. And it really, it comes down to where can you go? Except for our Garfield place, there really isn't any place to go. And an RV is a shelter. It's better than a tent or nothing. So it's hard to say, okay, we're going to take it away and put it in this impound, which you probably can't afford to get it out, and now we have to pay to recycle it. I don't have the answer, but I hear from people on both sides who are very upset about RVs on their street. I mean, it blocks your view, even if they don't have garbage. But I also hear from people who are desperate to stay in that shelter and they have nowhere to go, so they figure out the 72-hour thing, and hey, it worked. You didn't get tickets for it. So we need more places to go. And we need more people to enforce the ordinances we do have, because we don't have the people power to do that. And that makes them ineffective in at least a lot of situations. And then the residents get more upset. So what a dilemma. I want to take care of the residents and their peace of mind and happiness. And I want to keep people sheltered in whatever kind of shelter they can have. I know there's not a solution right now, but those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, one more round?
Yeah, I think the answer is that they do need places to go. We need more spaces. Problem is we just don't have enough of them. So people are parking on the streets and parking at parks. And so the answer is we got to do more of what we're already doing. Of course, that's very hard to do, and it takes more budget, and I don't know how fast we could do that, or if we could even do that. So so that answer seems to not be very satisfying. So we're relying on things like increasing fines and increasing impoundments, but I don't think that that's necessarily going to work either. This is a very hard world-class problem. That's why nobody solved it anywhere. I do have a data request though, where we could, Jeff, if you could get us some more numbers about, how often do these things get impounded, what the fees, how many people pay them, trying to get at the efficacy of this. Does this actually work? Is it a deterrent? I mean, we can anecdotally say it is, but I would like to see if we have any data. And then for the public hearing, I'd really like to hear what people's ideas are. We've been struggling with this for a very long time, and we have some good solutions, but we just can't get enough of them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Before I turn this over to Randy, it strikes me that some of the questions counselors are asking about, the effectiveness and the impact of impounding someone's cars. We certainly hear anecdotally complaints from people working with the unsheltered folks that someone's lost their car and all their possessions and they can't get it back, and now they're sleeping on the street. And I think it would be interesting to hear from the community court both about the citations that come through and to the extent to which people who have a car impounded or repeat violations, the extent to which the community court is able to help them access services more effectively, and whether there is the prospect in terms of our providers of sort of ensuring that if someone loses a vehicle to impoundment and has 5 days to live nowhere and then possibly longer because they can't get it back, is there a way that those folks sort of step into the queue in some way to get into some other shelter? So I think maybe there's a follow-up conversation to hear a little bit from community court about how that is working. Councilor Groves?
Thank you, Mayor. Move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance amending EC 5.225 and EC 5.265 as described in the AIS and schedule a public hearing on the ordinance.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, opposed? 2. Am I right? Emily, have you voted? Did I count you yet?
I voted yes, somewhat reluctantly.
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to what the public say.
Okay.
Mayor, who were the 2 no votes?
So I think it's just one no vote. I think I saw Greg as a no vote. Was everyone else a yes vote? I think that's right. Oh, Greg, you're a yes vote also? Greg, could you just answer, are you a yes or were you a yes or a no?
You're
2
muted.
thumbs up and down. Can't
Thumbs
hear
up
you.
or- yeah.
Hey.
Greg?
I'm having Zoom troubles. You're muting.
Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Did you vote yes or no? Thumbs up. Okay, so then that's unanimous
Yes.
as far as I can tell. Is that right? All right. good.
Yes.
Good, good, good. Thank you all very much for creating that clarity for me at the end. And we are ready to go on to the next topic, the next item related topic on this agenda. So I guess turn it back over to the manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I am just going to turn this over to Chief Skinner, who's going to lead this conversation. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you very much, and I appreciate this council and mayor being here to have this discussion. I am definitely not going to have a PowerPoint. We're going to have a really good discussion about the concept of open air drug use, which really is another way to talk a little bit about ballot measure 110 and some of the implications that we're seeing around our community and communities across the state as we look at the work that's being done statewide on this issue. The first thing I'd like to do is just kind of talk a little bit about the landscape of what we're seeing. When we think about the concept of open air drug use, really the way we're talking about this is that's just public facing drug use. Really what we want to talk about is the prevalence and the pervasiveness of drug use in our community. And maybe even more so the lack of addiction services to meet those demanding needs of people that are suffering from substance abuse disorder. Statewide, we're struggling with this and have struggled significantly since the passage of ballot measure 110, which took effect February of 2021. We voted on ballot measure 110 in November of 2020. And so we've been in this space for over 2 years. It'll be 3 years this February that we've been in this space. And really the premise behind ballot measure 110 and what we were trying to accomplish was we were trying to decriminalize the use of hard and dangerous drugs and create a pathway for people to seek addiction services. And one of the mechanisms by which people would be able to do that is through the implementation of declassifying the possession of a controlled substance from a misdemeanor. And just from a historical perspective, from 2017, that became a misdemeanor. Prior to 2017, many of these simple drug possession charges of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 controlled substances were a felony. And so we've continually downgraded that to where we're at now, which is a violation, which was a violation that really didn't really exist in our construct of accountability or enforcement. We created that new violation, which is a $100 fine. And the premise behind that was that law enforcement would spend an inordinate amount of time responding to people that were in possession of these controlled substances. We'd issue a $100 fine. And then through the criminal justice system, a person would have the ability to call a self-assessment line that was hosted by Lines for Life, complete a self-assessment to get the $100 fine removed. And then ultimately that would hopefully be a pathway to addiction services. What we've seen over the last several years, and this is going to be somewhat anecdotal because I've not heard the new numbers as of yet, but some numbers that I've heard in the not so recent past is that we have issued statewide, we have issued upwards of close to 6,000 citations for criminal or for possession of controlled substance. And of those citations, as few as 95 to 125 people have called the Lines for Life. And last time I've heard from Lines for Life, who are tracking this kind of a life cycle of somebody that would go through this is that we don't have even really one successful example of somebody that went from citation issued on the street to self-assessment to addiction services to a place of wellness. And so I think what overwhelmingly Oregonians have chosen to do is to re-engage in this ballot measure 110 discussion and do something around the reforming or the reformation of ballot measure 110. One thing I do want to make clear to council when we think about the possession of controlled substance, the use of controlled substance, the things that we're seeing out in our community is that we are not talking about repealing 110. Law enforcement is not supportive of repealing 110. Oregon Association Chiefs of Police, OACP, Oregon State Sheriff's Association, OSSA, Oregon District Attorneys Association, ODAA, is not in support of a full repeal of ballot measure 110 because we recognize there's mechanisms of ballot measure 110 that are important for us to keep in place. And so we are making some suggestions around some policy decisions, some policy recommendations around reforming ballot measure 110. The position that all of us are in, and the position that you've often heard me talk about in a variety of different issues, is the balance between individual harm reduction and community harm reduction. Getting to a place where we have a better balance, where so much of our effort over the last few years have been around individual harm reduction. How do we put things in place to help individually reduce the harm that people are encouraging? And unfortunately, what we've done is we've not also recognized the community harm reduction that has done as we continue to just focus on individual harm reduction. And so the policy recommendations that we have, and I've got 11 of them in front of me. Those of you that are part of IGR have likely seen these through Ethan Nelson giving those to you, but for purposes of today, it's probably good for just to at a high level go over what some of those policy recommendations are. But these policy recommendations are deeply, deeply rooted in that better balance between individual harm reduction and community harm reduction so that we can start making a measurable difference on what we see. From a police chief's perspective, it is not uncommon in many communities to see upwards of 80% of some of our lower level criminal activity. Most of those are the lower level livability crimes to include our theft, property crimes, shoplift, trespass. Some of those types of crimes have some kind of tangential attachment to people that are suffering from substance abuse disorder. I talk about them as being survival crimes, crimes of survival, where people are addicted to these substances, and these substances are more addictive today than they've ever been, with fentanyl being so prevalent in our community, which is a synthetic drug that's being made and very, very deadly. But many of our property crimes are anchored to that. So you think about the connection between individual harm reduction of somebody that's engaged in the grips of addiction of something so dangerous and damaging, and then the outcomes to the community with respect to the criminal behavior that we see to support that addiction. That speaks to the balance that we need between individual and community harm reduction. We at EPD and ESF are on pace to shatter the record for overdose calls for service and shatter the record for overdose deaths. Police officers and firefighters are administering Narcan, life-saving Narcan, at an alarming rate. If we did not have Narcan as part of a normal tool in our tool belt, you'd see those deaths. I don't know how many fold you'd see those deaths rise, but right now we're administering Narcan at an alarming rate in an attempt to save people's lives. And that is an example of individual harm reduction. But we are on pace to shatter the overdose calls for service and deaths. And so I think, again, Oregonians are realizing that we have to do something different than what we're doing in this space. So let me go over real quickly, if I can, and then I'm going to turn it over to Judge Gill, because I think what's really, really important is for Judge Gill to talk a little bit about what he sees on his end, what the substance addiction and what he sees at the bench, I think is really, really important to make sure we do. So when we talk about a comprehensive approach to addressing Oregon's addiction and community livability crisis, OACP, OSSA, ODAA, and League of Oregon Cities are all in agreement around these 11 policy recommendations that are really important. And I've got details about each one, but I don't want to spend a bunch of time going through the details. Number one is to reclassify possession as a Class A misdemeanor from an E violation. It gives us the ability, through probable cause, to get somebody into the criminal justice system, which right, wrong, or indifferent is a system that actually could create a pathway to wellness for people with some coercive treatment, as long as we have those on-demand treatment options. Proposal number 2 is to modify the statutory definition of a controlled substance from delivery of controlled substance to transfer of controlled substance. That's cleaning up language in our ORS that's been there forever around what is actually happening. The transfer of doesn't necessarily, in the delivery part, for us to prove that, we have to prove big quantities of controlled substances, scales, packaging material, those types of things. This is just a simple transfer of drugs. If you're giving a drug from one person to another, it's transferred, because we're seeing a lot of people sharing drugs, and we're seeing a lot of bad outcomes as a result of that. Policy proposal number 3 is to modify the statutory pretrial hold language to ensure that jails judges have the flexibility to hold drug dealers charged with distributing a controlled substance and repeat offenders. Policy 4, fund the county probation departments to supervise misdemeanor theft and property crime cases. This speaks to the connectivity of our theft and property crime misdemeanors and how many of those folks are substance addicted, and having our county probation officers be able to supervise them and be able to make sure that we're that they're getting through the drug courts and the treatment options that they need. Policy 5, proposal 5, is to create a new misdemeanor, a misdemeanor for public use of controlled substance, to align with the current law that prohibits the public use of alcohol and marijuana. Interestingly enough, that never occurred to make that a misdemeanor or make that a crime to actually use it in public, and it speaks specifically to the open air drug use that we see. Policy 6 is create a new Class A misdemeanor for use of a controlled substance in an enclosed public space that endangers another person. This speaks to public transit. So we're trying to take a look at all of these places that we're seeing pain statewide, and that addresses that one. The treatment and community of focus solutions start on policy 7, prioritize adequate and sustainable funding for Oregon specialty courts. We've seen time and time again, drug court, mental health court, veterans court, all of those courts are really important courts for us to have. Most of those courts are housed out of our circuit court system and our district attorney's office. And so those are really important to make sure that we're funding those. 8 is establish authority to utilize of welfare holds of up to 72 hours for intoxicated persons who pose a danger to self or others. We already have that for those that are suffering from mental illness that are a danger to themselves or others. This would allow for people that are intoxicated that we deem a danger to themselves or others to also be hold and detox. 9 is create adequate stabilization, detoxification, and treatment capacity in jurisdictions throughout Oregon by making sustainable investments in sobering center stabilization and treatment bed capacity for adults and juveniles. This is a really, really key component. When you heard me earlier say on-demand treatment is the only way this is going to work, this speaks specifically to reappropriating ballot measure 110 funding to make sure we have on-demand treatment for people. It doesn't make any sense for us to arrest every single person that we have in possession if they don't have a pathway to treatment, and this has to be on-demand treatment. And so this is really important. 10 is support the establishment of opioid overdose quick response teams. And lastly, support the aligning the siting and residential and secure residential facilities with a requirement in the Fair Housing Act. And there's some details there that I can read to you. But those are the high level policy recommendations that we have that in conjunction with those other organizations. And I know that this council is thinking about whether or not they want to from a very high level, support ongoing efforts in reforming ballot measure 110. And I wanted to give you some context around the types of conversations that we're having as it pertains to handling our open air drug use. With that, let me stop there and offer Judge Gill an opportunity to talk a little bit about his experiences.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Mayor, councilors, it's good to see you again. It's been a little while. And so I was asked to come here and tell a little bit about what the court has seen, specifically since the passage of 110 and Senate Bill 755. But I want to make clear that it's not in no way advocating for any particular change in the criminal code, advocating for what should be a crime, what shouldn't be a crime. That's really not my role But what I can tell you is some of the effects that I've seen from the passage of Measure 110. And by far, the most significant impact that we've seen here of two is the amount of local resources that have become available to address a lot of the needs that the folks who come through the Eugene Municipal Court have. It really is a good way to think about it is one of the reasons that we started our community court here, the reason we started our mental health court here and our problem-solving docket. And to a certain extent, those folks who are on our docket for not having the capacity to stand trial is to make sure that these folks receive services that are going to help them in the position that they're in and hopefully put them in a better spot when they're done being criminal justice involved folks. And so, you know, the basic premise for community court, you have resource providers on site for someone who's been charged with one of these low-level crimes. And the idea is they agree to connect with these providers, work with these providers, and then ultimately somewhere down the road, they can get their criminal case dismissed. But the real point is to connect them with providers to keep them from coming into the system. Since the passage of Measure 110, we have had existing providers that we've worked with in the past be able to increase the amount of service that they've been able to give overall. And that includes those folks in the community court, mental health court, some services that have been around for a long time that know the folks who are here in this town and understand what their needs are, whether it's purely substance abuse and addiction, or whether it's an underlying mental illness, whether it's diagnosed or not diagnosed, past trauma, and of course, trying to run the gamut of being unhoused. But then also there have been the creation of local providers that didn't exist before that have made an extraordinary impact on what the court's been able to provide space for these folks coming through our court. Local organizations that provide medically assisted treatment, which has been a huge game changer in a lot of the folks who are addicted that come through the court. The ability to work with programs that can help provide housing. And another really big one is peer support. With those tools now available to the court, at least through our programs and as much as they can provide it, it has been a boon for a lot of what we're trying to do here in the court. We've had folks who have been involved with a lot of these providers that are case samples of success, and without those providers wouldn't have been so before. And so one of the pieces of Measure 110 that came through was to make sure that there's funding in every county of behavioral health resource network that helps allocate funds to different providers that address certain areas of need in the community, specifically substance abuse, but really identifying all needs, whether they're criminogenic needs or not. And the creation of these behavioral health resource networks, or BHRNs, has been the reason why we now have access to these resources. The vast majority of the folks that come through our court that have these lower level crimes, the disorderly conducts, the criminal trespasses, a lot of the property crimes that the chief was referring to, whether it's an intentional crime like theft or criminal mischief, and these effect on the community. These resources that we have now address those very reasons why these folks are involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. It's not always a but for what we see here with being this high volume, fast paced court that we are. It's a no brainer to see that these resources being provided by 110 have made a significant impact. And so anything having to do with resources and continuing the resources for these behavioral health resource networks and keeping them accountable for providing the services that they're supposed to under 110 would be hugely important to the court and the continued success of the court in these programs. So, Chief, I don't know if there was another area that you wanted me to address specifically or generally before.
No, Judge, I appreciate your input. You have a tendency to see these people in real time, just like we do, and our men and women that serve this community do. And so I think that was good perspective. Certainly want to leave 15 minutes here for council. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, to monitor the Q&A portion.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we have a queue. So I've got Mike, then Alan, and Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you both for all of your presentations. Chief, I would say that I'm entirely in agreement with you that all of the 11 points that you suggested are things that we should be suggesting as changes with regard to 110. Your item number, I want to say it was either 8 or it was 9 with regard to the monies that come from 110 and where they're directed in the community. And I think that's essentially what Judge Gill was touching on as well here. I know that initially when 110 first passed, there were questions around the standards involved in therapy and treatment for substance abuse treatment. And I know that was a question at the legislature, what qualified as effective treatment. If you and the judge as well want to speak more specifically to the kinds of drug treatment the kinds that are available and the kinds that work or what we need, I'd love to hear more about that. I would feel badly if we were making sure to fund things that were less effective than others. So would either of you like
real quickly, what I would say is there's not a one size fits all for treatment. A variety of people that we and Judge Gill see need various levels of treatment that they could be successful in. I do think that there is a lack of inpatient type stabilization treatment for many people that we're dealing with. We see that both in the mental health space as well as the substance abuse space. And so if there was one place I would want an evidence-based solution or evidence-based direction of resources to be towards would be more kind of intensive detoxification, stabilization, inpatient types of treatment.
I'll follow on, Councilor Clark. That's a great question, and it's hard to not go anecdotal with a question like that. Right. But I want to go back to a piece of one of the recommendations that the chief was talking about. What we see a lot of, because these are e-violations, and e-violations currently can only be filed in the circuit court. The municipal courts aren't, by law allowed to handle these drug type offenses, whether the violations or crimes. Because it's going to the circuit court, that means it's touching the DA's office, and that means there's a lot of decision making on whether something's actually going to be filed as an e-citation or not. When possession of controlled substances were felonies, that's when you saw the uptick of drug courts and other specialty dockets, including treatment courts. The reduction down to misdemeanors didn't necessarily change it that much. We saw an expansion of those kinds of specialty courts to try to keep these folks who are drug involved in the court system. And I think the reason is because that kind of a structure, hand in hand with a treatment program, if it's a non-residential type program, can be extraordinarily effective for someone in their recovery. And having that accountability piece with the court following on, I found very effective in our specialty dockets here. And so I can't speak to the drop in participation in the circuit court, drug court, or mental health court. But I do know, going back to that PC or that probable cause piece that the chief was talking about, and having the circuit court as involved and DA's office is involved, and honestly, Lane County Sheriff's Office and through the jail being involved, and ultimately parole and probation, which is somebody that we don't work with directly involved. Without that structure, a lot of the treatment, even if someone had residential treatment, may not be as effective as it could be. And I wanted to make sure that I touched on that point.
And lastly, then, thank you. Chief Skinner, are those recommendations legislative ones at the state level? Is that what I understood?
These are recommendations that those four entities are proposing that our legislators look at around policy proposals as ballot measure 110 reform is being discussed at that level. Yes.
So it's our council input is really through IGR at that level, and our legislative representatives locally. Is there any recommendation for counselors as a whole to see more a higher degree of potential success at the state level?
That's a great question, and that's a perfect way for me to also remind council that we have Ethan Nelson here to wrap this up to answer that very question.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you, Chief and Councilor Clark. The recommendation that's on the AIS is to adopt a statement pretty broad that just says City of Eugene supports reform Measure 110. And so, and I think that it's similar language that Lane County has adopted. And in conversations with colleagues for the City of Portland, they're also in that kind of broad language that the governing bodies have given direction then to advocate for. What does that mean? And what Chief Skinner just walked through is the comprehensive a number of different items that allow the chief and Judge Gill and myself and other staff to then advocate appropriately within. And so when you say, well, what does that broad statement mean? Those policy items would likely be what will be put forward in a number of bills that'll get pushed forward from the legislature this year.
Is Springfield joining as well?
My understanding is that the Springfield City Council adopted a similar motion of support reform for the Measure 110.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Alan, then Randy, then Emily.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't vote for Measure 110. I didn't think it was very well thought out. It was a big, giant experiment. It's definitely not working as intended, and it's super slow and rolling out a lot of this stuff. We were at the bottom of the barrel, 50 out of 50, if I got it right, for substance abuse funding. And now we're up a little bit in like number 45-ish or something like that because of this. But still, treatment is so woefully inadequate. And a lot of these things that you're talking about, Chief and Judge, are so inadequate, even with this stuff. And it has been a long time since we've seen you, Judge. Nice beard. We could see it last time. I'm also wondering about the parallel of 110 and fentanyl. And the increase in overdoses. I'm not sure that's a cause and effect. I think they're probably in parallel. I don't know if you've seen any information on that. Regardless of Measure 110, fentanyl probably would have been just as deadly and just as big an issue, maybe just a little bit worse with 110. But I think the rise of fentanyl and 110 were coincident. But I still don't like 110. It does definitely need rethinking and reform. It's not working. Hearing the 11 policy recommendations that you made, that you briefly went over, Chief, sounds really good, but I don't have enough information. Is that something you could send to us? And is there any analysis on the implication or impacts that we could see?
For sure. IGR has this document that I was reading from, and under each one of the policy recommendations is a synopsis that better describes and helps you understand the reasoning behind each one of the policy recommendations. So my guess is that those of you on IGR would have that, could distribute that.
Yeah, I'll look forward to reading that, because I support Measure 110 reform, but I don't know what adding it to our federal legislative policy supporting Measure 110 reform means. If it means these 11 things, or I guess Ethan, what you said is a broad statement, TBD, figure out what that means later.
Yeah, correct. And also the existing Measure 110 policy statement that's in the document is old. And so we'd want to update for what's being currently discussed at the legislature. And this will, and our hope here was based upon feedback from council over a course of time is on items like this that are legislative items that are of significance. We wanted to bring to council for a discussion rather than simply start at IGR and then bring it to council and have that discussion later on. We're kind of priming the pump here, get direction from you, and incorporate it into our documents.
Right, I applaud that move. IGR, if you're not on IGR, you don't really know what's going on in the legislature. So things of significance like this definitely should come to the council. But if we could get those 11 recommendations, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Randy, and then Emily.
Thank you, Chief Skinner, and thank you, Judge Gill, for the presentation. I do appreciate it. I, like Councilor Zelenka, did not vote for 110, but I do support the reform. I'm not interested in criminalizing people that need help, that have a health issue, an addiction problem. But I will also add that, you know, the work session as constructed was about open air drug use. And that's something I still think we can do something about. And I liked what you had to say about that, Chief Skinner. I do think it is an issue in this community. I don't think our children should be subjected to seeing that. I don't think just everyday community members should have to confront and see that in their city. Fentanyl wasn't around when I was a firefighter responder and going to these calls, but heroin and black tar heroin certainly were. And I've seen lives destroyed. I've seen families destroyed. I've seen the consequences with addiction and drug use. And it's something that we have to take seriously. Our community is experiencing theft that's driven to feed drug habits. This is something we need to find ways to deal with. And so I will certainly support ballot measure 110 reform that helps get at the treatment piece. But I also want us to really take this seriously about what can we do to have some teeth there to stop the open air use that's just right out in front of everybody. I still remember keenly the email we received from the youth softball umpire, where a young man was passed out with all of his drug paraphernalia laid out for 2 separate softball games, and right amongst the families with their children. That's not a vision I want to see for our community, and it's something we do need to take seriously. So I hope we will go down that path and find a way to stop that piece of, or at least have mechanisms we can put in place. And I know, Judge Gill, I do appreciate all the work with restorative justice and finding alternative ways of addressing people that do come before you. But, you know, we've received some input from community members afraid that we're trying to criminalize addiction again. And that's not what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing us trying to find ways to deal with the problem that is impacting our community in a just way. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Emily.
Thank you, Randy. I agree with you. I don't really want to criminalize addiction. I want to help lower it. Absolutely, the open air use and the transfer is a big deal downtown. You can sit on the corner and shoot up, but, you know, don't smoke a cigarette or drink a beer. I mean, marijuana or a cigarette. But we don't have the ability to enforce that or to watch it. And then there's nothing we can do about the open use anyway. The property crimes I see as a really big problem. This is how addiction is funded, and it affects everybody who has anything stolen, which I live downtown. You better lock it up or bye-bye. But again, we don't respond to 1/3 of our calls, and property crimes are not, you know, on the top of the list. So that's a problem that affects everybody. Will we communicate with, I guess, more discussion, which things we would like to see reformed, and where are we going to get the money? All of this, it costs money. I know marijuana tax is supposed to go to these addiction services, but we're not seeing it. And what else could we use that money for? This is a great start, but boy, I'm really concerned about all this. Fentanyl is an enormous problem. I know people who have overdosed. I usually keep a couple doses of Narcan in my house just because I've seen it on the sidewalk. And I went to HIV Alliance to get some more, and they gave me 8. Usually I kept 2. And they said, oh, it's so strong, it takes at least 3. So we've got a huge problem with I-5 in Mexico and meth and fentanyl, and we don't have the money. You know, 72 hours hold for getting off your addiction is great, but where? The jail? We already don't have the room there at the jail. So, like so many of our problems, comes down a lot to money. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. So, Mike, one more comment?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Are we voting on the support of the 11 items that the chief mentioned today?
Yeah. Yes, we have I think the Council Gross has a motion to, let's see, I got to read the motion, but Councilor Gross does have a motion in the AIS.
Wonderful news. I'll be patient. Thank you very much.
Matt, one more comment?
Yeah, Mayor, I'll be quick. In Councilor Grove's proposed motion, it indicates that the city of Eugene supports efforts to reform ballot measure 110. And I'm going to be supportive of it, of course. I wonder, and it's probably more of a question for Ethan, do we need to be crystal clear that the city of Eugene supports efforts to reform, not repeal measure 110?
Councillor Keating, I think that no, the answer is no. I think that just by the motion that we've put forward is in alignment with other jurisdictions, and as the discussion occurred today, there's not been any statewide discussion about repeal. It's reform and move forward, and so I don't think that we would need that today.
All right, super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy to put the motion on the table.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to include in the city's 2024 state and federal legislative policy document that Eugene supports efforts to reform ballot measure 110.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh gosh, it shifts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. That passes unanimously. That was terrific. I want to thank you, Chief and Judge, for your presentation. It was very helpful, very elucidating. Look forward to what's following. And with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you all.